It was 4 a.m. when the cold pre-dawn air seeped deep into her lungs. At a time when others were still lost in sweet dreams, Helen, as usual, hoisted the heavy security gate of her small diner. The old metal shutter groaned as it rattled upwards, the sound echoing through the quiet street. Helen instinctively flipped the switch for the fluorescent lamp in the kitchen. Under the cold, flickering light, she noticed the grease stains she hadn't managed to wipe away yesterday. With a sigh, she sat down at a table with her calculator. Yesterday's earnings, the result of a full day's struggle over a hot stove, amounted to only $1,000. If she deducted $700 for the groceries she needed to buy today, Helen was left with just $300. Only $300. This isn't even enough to cover minimum wage for a day, let alone my own salary, Helen muttered, jotting the numbers in a worn notebook. Utility bills for electricity, gas, water, plus the monthly rent for the premises. The more numbers she added, the heavier her heart became. She carried this entire burden alone, while her husband, David, was likely sleeping peacefully at home, oblivious to her worries. The meager $600 he contributed each month barely covered his own expenses for cigarettes and drinks with friends, and it would be shameful even to suggest adding it to the family budget. Opening the refrigerator and pulling out a heavy drawer of vegetables, Helen mumbled to herself, "And what will he do with that money? Just complain he doesn't even have enough for a drink." At 8 a.m., her phone rang shrilly. Patricia Peterson, her mother-in-law, appeared on the screen. Suppressing a bad premonition, Helen wiped her wet hands on her apron and answered. Patricia immediately got straight to the point, starting to gnaw at Helen's soul. "Helen, you know the lease on my apartment expires in 2 months. The landlord called. He said he wouldn't renew it, just putting me out on the street." Her mother-in-law's voice was surprisingly confident. In reality, the security deposit for that apartment was part of the savings Helen brought from her parents' home when she got married, and money she had painstakingly saved for over 10 years managing the diner. With a trembling voice, Helen asked, "Patricia, what are you planning to do now? You need to find something in advance." Patricia snorted. "What to do? What to do? You need to handle it. You know my son's salary." "How can you even ask me that? They say you're doing quite well at your diner. This time, you'll have to take care of everything. Will you be at peace if I, an old woman, end up on the street? How can you be such a daughter-in-law and not care a bit about your mother-in-law?" Helen pressed her lips together tightly. She wanted to complain that things weren't going as well as before, that she worked from early morning until late night and barely anything was left, but her mother-in-law wouldn't listen. On the contrary, she considered Helen's efforts a given sacrifice. "Patricia, I'm also really struggling with money right now. Business is bad. Please, try to understand my situation." "How calculating you are. What do you mean, business is bad? I saw it. Your diner is packed with people eating lunch. You're always like this when it comes to money. You don't even recognize your own mother-in-law. It's infuriating, isn't it? Anyway, I don't know anything about it. Find us an apartment within 2 months." Her mother-in-law blurted out everything she wanted and hung up. Helen stared blankly at her phone, then took a deep breath. At 8 p.m., exhausted, she returned home, and the scene in the living room made her condition even more pitiful. Her husband, David, was sprawled on the couch, laughing while watching TV. A mountain of dirty dishes was piled in the sink, and empty chip bags lay on the floor. When Helen brought up the apartment for his mother, David, without taking his eyes off the remote, casually replied, "Honey, Mom's lease is ending. What should we do?" "You think about it too. We have 2 months to figure something out. Why are you panicking already? Helen, your problem is you're too nervous. You need to live simpler, more calmly." Calmly? Money doesn't just fall from the sky. We're talking about $400,000. You know that with your salary, you can't even pay the interest on a loan. When Helen raised her voice, David, on the contrary, got angry and stood up from the couch. "I'm sick of it too. But what can I do if I don't have those opportunities? Do you want me to die or something? Your diner is thriving. Just work a little harder. We can't let our mom end up on the street. Fulfill your duty as a daughter-in-law." Helen went to the kitchen and gulped down a glass of cold water. The word duty pierced her heart like a dagger. She no longer understood who she was in this family, the head or a money-making machine. When she placed dinner in front of David, he grabbed a spoon without a word of thanks. Helen sat opposite him and, with a last glimmer of hope, asked, "Have you saved anything from your salary? There should be some help, right?" "Chewing," David replied with irritation. "Savings from $600. I also need to maintain myself, so I don't look like a pauper at work." "Do you want me to be humiliated there? I'm just sick of you." The next morning, Helen again dragged her heavy body to the diner. The physical pain was nothing compared to the loneliness of knowing no one was on her side. However, around 3 p.m., a message arrived that turned her whole life upside down. It was from David. The terrible news was that his company salary had been garnished. Helen's hands trembled, and she called him. "Garnished? What does that mean? Why was your salary garnished?" Sobbing, David confessed, "Helen, I'm sorry. It seems it's because I once co-signed for a friend. He disappeared, and the creditors contacted my job. If I don't immediately pay, woosher, lin, axless. It's today. It's tame today I does not command. In the tension action with COD, asked, it's dotted on the mosa. Extension, it's prove, in the stated. Expective is at it, ax did better. One night, anyone. Explaned, actioned, on the rudder, addiclan. It's not main. Apper for wit. Life. In the scatted. Of nod. SN. 10 tonner. Ender favor. It's not terrace made it. I have with. Live. Today. Reading this 2%. Eper. Exlandisly. Haper. It's Ottomans to videos raider. Is no of it. Together. He. In the sands. Apsless. All is in. Ingrusted. Act. As Mavertown. Action 7. And on the scrath. If you tell backed, ants the spottis. This is mataclanted. It's the one by, it's not a finis. And tentrals. Atzer. 80. And in disturpercent. Axas. At. Action resoln. In fact if you as. And when not it a started. At a stay. H brost. It's relive. In this freighted. Act. And today. Thanks for watching. And we're putted one, Axavita, and the screened. And that is Davidi. Axaply. Doend. Underwide. In incident. To have night now. In the masted. And her fighting at the move-in presses. And of this teening croof. And the pressability. If you won. In quote. Aliphus. It's tabor the stained. And it minus defit. It's of not never been time and remended. 8. Interneted dod. It's not really ting. 2-1. Action. I resolvers and has to act. Anyone. And that it. Dactively all of it. And dan a minute, ax plans time and spaced. As important to screen. As the red. Action are getting the sudden. Anyway. Instance. It's creasing ater. I have litis. It's problem in the medic. Do you there one? Mataclear. And has provided. And has provided by the re. To this very times of othertated, and it did bring. Action. In fact the first it did. Actually. Pangishant, 0, E1. T catusing lepony of my salary. Please, save me. Helen ran outside. Ignoring the stares of customers, she screamed, 50,000. Are you kidding me? That's money I earn breathing the smell of fried food from morning until night. I already need to find money for your mother's apartment. And now I have to pay your debts too? Are you even human? How could you do this to me? I'm sorry. I didn't think it would turn out this way. If you don't help, I might get fired. Think about our family. Help just this once. David cowardly hid behind family until the end, cornering Helen. She slammed the phone down and leaned her head against the cold wall. Tears streamed down her face, but in the kitchen, a customer's order was burning. Helen roughly wiped away her tears. She hated the reality that didn't even give her time to grieve. Fine. I will feed this entire family. If you treat me like this, then I will act my own way. Helen swept a cold gaze across the diner. Something hardened deep inside her. Now, her goal wasn't just to feed the family, but to make those who deceived and used her pay a terrible price. Helen put on her mask again, forced a smile for her customers, and went back into the diner. As the lease expiration date drew closer, Helen's heart tightened. Each time she looked at the calendar, the date circled in red seemed like a death sentence. Only 1 month remained. After closing, in the empty diner, Helen sat at the counter and pulled her bank statements from deep within her purse. 5 savings accounts, accumulated over 10 years of blood and sweat without a single holiday off, and 1 checking account for the diner's operating funds lay on the table. Adding all the numbers, she had exactly $400,000. If I give this money away, I'll have nothing left for my old age. Must I really give it to these people? Helen whispered, brushing away a tear that fell onto a statement. Meanwhile, her husband David loudly claimed he was looking for loans, but the result was predictable. No financial institution in the world would lend money to a person with a ruined credit history due to a co-signed debt. Returning from work, David tossed his bag and spoke defiantly. Helen, I'm sorry. I looked into everything. Lending rules are so strict now that they won't give me a dime in my name. Well, what can you do? That's life. Helen asked coldly, with a sneer. You looked into it, meaning you searched online a couple of times while lying in bed? Did you even try to go somewhere in person? David, feeling a prick of conscience, lowered his head, but didn't even try to make excuses. He just glanced at Helen and fidgeted with his toes. At that moment, her mother-in-law, Patricia, called again. Helen stared at the vibrating phone for a long time, then, making a decision, answered. Patricia's sharp voice poured from the receiver. Hey, Helen, what are you doing there? My landlord calls me every day, rushing me. And what about the money? Are you going to leave us on the street? Patricia. I'm doing everything I can to find the money. Please just wait a little longer. What do you mean, wait? Less than a month is left. If you have such a decent diner and you can't find that much money, what kind of daughter-in-law are you? Resolve this quickly. Patricia screamed as if Helen owed her. Helen silently endured the ear-ringing insults and replied, I'll handle everything. Please, don't rush me. What do you mean handle? This is your direct responsibility. Don't try to play the benefactor here. Transfer the money quickly. There's no time. The call abruptly ended, and Helen, putting down the phone, took a deep breath of the cold air. The next morning, Helen left the house earlier than usual. She headed not to the diner, but to the bank. Taking a number, she waited her turn, her heart pounding wildly. Finally, when her number was called, Helen handed all 5 of her savings account statements through the window. Please close all these accounts. Every last penny. The bank employee, looking at the documents in surprise, cautiously asked, Ma'am, the maturity date for these accounts is only 1 month away. If you close them now, the loss of interest will be huge. Are you sure? If you wait a little longer, you'll get several $1,000s more. Helen, with a trembling hand, signed the account closure form and replied, It's fine. I have something more important than life right now. Please process it. The rustling of the closing statements sounded like a cold, mechanical sound. Helen watched detachedly as 10 years of her life turned into mere papers in a few minutes. An hour later, having also withdrawn money from the diner's operating account, she held a bank check for $400,000 in her hands. This is my entire life. All my blood and sweat are here, Helen whispered softly, tucking the check deep into her purse. Returning home, she saw her mother-in-law, Patricia, and husband, David, already sitting in the living room. Their gazes were fixed on her purse. Patricia spoke first. Well, did you get the money? How much is there? Exactly $400,000. Yes, Patricia. Here's the check for $400,000. Before Helen could finish, Patricia's eyes gleamed like a predator spotting its prey. Excellent. Tomorrow, we'll go to the real estate agent and finalize the deal. Oh, and don't forget the main thing. The contract, of course, must be in David's name. When there's a man of the house, there's order in the family. Helen slowly shook her head and said firmly, No, Patricia. Since I'm paying my money, the contract will be in my name. Patricia, as if disbelieving her ears, frowned and screamed. What did you say? If not in my son's name, then whose? You dare contradict your mother-in-law? In my name. Did David invest a single penny in this? This is my property, which I earned without knowing rest or sleep. So, it's natural that it will be in my name. Where did you learn such things? Don't you know that husband and wife are one? My money is David's money, and David's money is mine, and it's more convenient to register it in his name because of taxes. What do you even understand to be so stubborn? Patricia, red with anger, began waving her hands. Helen, without blinking, looked directly at David. Darling, what do you think? Do you think it's right that a house you haven't put a single penny into will be in your name? David, glancing at his mother, mumbled under his breath. Helen, let's just do what Mom says. What difference does it make whose name it's in? We'll still live there. Mom will be more at ease, and I won't lose face in front of my colleagues. So that you don't lose face, I should give up all my assets? Don't even dream of it. I'll never agree to that. Hearing Helen's firm refusal, Patricia began to scream and rant again. Oh, you snake! How you must despise my son to say such things. We don't need such a daughter-in-law in this family. Immediately register it in my son's name. Patricia, I don't despise him. I'm telling the truth. If there's no contribution, it's better to keep quiet. You want to take everything I've saved my whole life and then rule over it too? Isn't that robbery? At such a rebuke, Patricia was speechless and could only open and close her mouth. The next day, leaving her mother-in-law fuming, Helen went to the real estate agent alone. Handing the agent her ID and the check, she clearly stated, "The name on the contract is mine, Helen Miller. Not joint ownership, but sole ownership." When all the formalities were settled, she held a contract clearly bearing her name. Returning home, she saw Patricia waiting for her at the entrance, who snatched the contract from her. Seeing the name in the buyer's section, Patricia's face instantly turned pale. You really put it in your name? You're crazy. Are you out of your mind? Patricia threw the contract to the floor with trembling hands. Helen picked it up with a cold smirk and put it in her purse. Patricia, I knew everything from the beginning, that you called the landlord in advance and conspired with him to raise the price, to pocket the difference in your son's name. I knew everything. Patricia's eyes darted around in confusion. Helen looked down at her coldly and threw out a final warning. You tried to use me, hiding behind family. This was the last time. If you want to live in this house, bought with my money, you will follow my rules or get out right now. Helen walked into her room without looking back, Patricia's hysterical sobs echoing in the living room. Exactly 1 week had passed since Helen, overcoming all difficulties, registered the apartment in her name. In the diner kitchen, after the lunch rush, chaos reigned. The smell of burnt grease was everywhere, and mountains of dirty dishes piled up. Helen, wearing rubber gloves, tirelessly washed plates when her husband David's phone, lying in the corner, vibrated insistently. Lately, he had been receiving suspiciously frequent calls from unknown numbers. Hello? Yes. Oh, I understand. It's a bit inconvenient now. Please wait. I'll call back soon. David, glancing at Helen, hastily exited through the back door of the diner to continue his conversation. Helen turned off the water and, holding her breath, listened to her husband's voice. From beyond the wall, she heard the word collateral, which grated on her ears. Helen quickly wiped her hands with a damp towel and went outside. Seeing her, David flinched and hastily ended the call. Helen, arms crossed, fixed her husband with an icy stare and asked, "Who are you talking to so mysteriously?" "I just heard something about collateral. What's going on? What conversation?" David, his face pale, shoved his phone deep into his pocket and mumbled, "Oh, nothing. Just a work call. Don't pay attention. Go back to work." "Why are they talking about collateral for work? And if it's work, why are you hiding from me?" "What are you hiding?" "You've been getting suspicious calls lately." When Helen stepped towards him, David looked away and just coughed. Helen's patience snapped, and she snatched the phone from his pocket. "Hey, you can't! Give it back, Helen!" David tried to grab the phone, but Helen was faster. The screen wasn't even locked. In the call log, there were dozens of unfamiliar numbers, and the messages were a nightmare. Debt collection, legal firm, forced execution. These terrifying words filled the screen. What does all this mean? Collection? Legal firm? You're in trouble again. What is it this time? Helen's voice echoed in the backyard. David, resigned, lowered his head and barely whispered, "Helen, I'll explain everything. Just calm down and listen to me. Remember I co-signed for a friend? It turns out the amount was more than I thought. With interest, it came to about Basher, Ling Ling Ling, Ba Wen, 80,000? You said $80,000. Are you out of your mind? And you've been hiding all this from me?" Helen's vision blurred. Just a week ago, she had scraped together every last penny, including the diner's operating funds, to find $400,000 for the apartment, and now another $80,000. David, on the contrary, began to make excuses. "I wasn't hiding it. I just didn't want to worry you. I was trying to resolve it myself somehow. I racked my brain day and night. Do you think I wasn't doing anything?" "Resolve? With what money were you going to resolve this? Your salary has already been garnished. I bought the apartment. I earn a living. Where were you going to get $80,000? Helen shook the phone in her husband's face, pouring out her pain. David said nothing, just kicked at the ground. From there, Helen drove straight to her mother-in-law, Patricia. She was sitting arrogantly on the living room couch, eating fruit and watching a TV show. "Patricia, did you know that David is being pursued by creditors because of a co-signed debt?" Patricia, without taking her eyes off the TV, replied indifferently, "I knew. Our David isn't one to share problems. If he told me, it means he was really at his wit's end. You knew, and you didn't tell me anything. You saw how I worked myself to the bone to find money for the apartment, and how could you keep silent?" Only then did Patricia put down the remote and stare at Helen. "If I had told you, you would have made a scene just like you are now. I just told him to keep quiet so as not to cause trouble in the house. What's wrong with that? To be yelling at your mother-in-law. What's wrong with that? Is $80,000 not money to you? Am I even a member of this family? Why am I made a fool in every important matter? Speak quieter. The neighbors will think we're broke. What's the point of complaining now that it's already happened? You are so tiresome." Patricia calmly picked up a piece of apple with a fork and put it in her mouth. Helen clenched her fists. She was trembling with rage. "Patricia, you're not by any chance hoping I'll solve this too, are you? Is that why you conspired and hid everything from me? What do you mean, hope? This is your husband's business. Who else will do it if not you? If David can't, then you should, shouldn't you? Otherwise, our David will be humiliated on the street, fired from his job, and who will clean up all this mess? It's all to your detriment." Patricia's logic was simple. Her son's mistake was an unfortunate incident, and correcting it was the direct responsibility of the well-earning daughter-in-law. Looking at her mother-in-law, Helen shivered. The next day, Helen sat down David, who had returned from work, and interrogated him again. "Patricia knew everything. You two conspired, and only deceived me. You said you hid it because you were worried about me? No, you just treated me like an insurance policy. Helen, this is too much. I just consulted with Mom. I really wanted to tell you when I had everything sorted out. I'm sick to death of it myself." "Exactly. You're sick of it. And me? I work from morning till night, breathing the smell of fried food so this family doesn't fall apart. And behind my back, you just dig holes. Where are you going to get $80,000 now? That's the problem. I can't get a loan, so I consulted with Mom. Maybe you can help a little?" David cowardly tried to grab Helen's hand. She disgustedly pulled it away. That night, Patricia quietly entered Helen's room. "Helen, you absolutely must not contact these creditors and pretend you don't know about them. If they find out the apartment is in your name, it will be big trouble. They might immediately put a lien on the property. And what am I supposed to do? Run and hide my whole life? Just sit quietly and keep silent. We'll buy some time and find some way out. You're smart. Figure something out. It's all for our family." Patricia patted Helen's shoulder, as if doing her a great favor. Helen roughly shook off her mother-in-law's hand and said coldly, "So, in the end, my money was a reliable insurance policy for this family. An ATM that can be used at any moment when trouble strikes. That's why you lied to me and used me all this time, wasn't it? Oh, why do you say such hurtful things? We're one family, and in a family, people help each other. Patricia, feeling no guilt whatsoever, left the room. Helen sat in the dark room, feeling herself sinking into the bed. So I was the insurance in this house. My hard-earned money was needed to cover their mistakes. A hot tear rolled down Helen's cheek. But it wasn't a tear of sorrow. It was the beginning of an unstoppable rage towards her husband and mother-in-law, who had so cruelly betrayed her. In the darkness, Helen's eyes gleamed as she made a decision. She would no longer allow herself to be so easily used. Her mother-in-law, Patricia, entered the living room with a wide smile on her face. But for Helen, that smile was like a cup of poison. Patricia arrogantly sat on the couch and tossed a casual remark to Helen, who was washing dishes. Helen, I've decided. Next Saturday, we're having a housewarming party. I'll invite all our relatives and my friends, so keep that in mind. Helen froze, stopping her dishwashing, and stared blankly at her mother-in-law. For her, who had shelled out every last penny, including the diner's operating funds, to buy the $400,000 apartment, a housewarming party was an unimaginable luxury. Patricia, what housewarming? You know I'm in a difficult financial situation right now, and there's a lot of work at the diner. Patricia squinted, not hiding her displeasure. We bought a new apartment. Of course we need to celebrate with a housewarming, a fresh start. What are you talking about? People are watching. It would be awkward to just skip it. Think about our family's reputation. I've already told all the relatives and my club friends, so clear your Saturday. Helen, pressing her lips together, asked about the number of guests. Patricia, counting on her fingers, replied carelessly, well, about 20 people. Our relatives and my friends from the club, roughly that many. Cook plenty, 20 people. To cook food for that many people alone, Helen would have to stay up all night. Helen, with a trembling voice, suggested ordering catering, but was immediately met with a stern refusal from Patricia. Catering? When the daughter-in-law cooks with her own heart, guests feel welcome. You manage a diner and you cook well. What's a little extra effort for you? Do you want to embarrass me? Patricia waved her hand, as if dismissing a trifle, and went to her room. Helen stood in the middle of the kitchen, looking at the empty refrigerator, feeling crushed. Her husband, David, who returned from work in the evening, was even worse. When Helen asked him for at least a guest list, he replied with irritation, Honey, Mom said she'd handle everything. Why are you asking me? Just do what she says. My head is splitting from work right now. David, ignoring Helen's difficulties, closed the door to his room. Until Thursday evening, her mother-in-law still hadn't given an exact number of guests, only irresponsibly repeating, cook plenty. In the end, early Friday morning, Helen went to the grocery store alone. She filled 2 carts to the brim, and it still wasn't enough. She had to carry heavy bags in both hands. The supermarket receipt showed $2,500. Paying with her card, Helen shed heartbreaking tears. This money, like everything else, came out of Helen's pocket without anyone's help. That night, as she prepared for the housewarming, became the cruelest and most unforgettable in Helen's life. She even closed the diner to manage everything, and finished only by 4 a.m. The kitchen was filled with acrid smoke and the smells of all sorts of dishes, and Helen's arm bore 3 bright red burns. When she was frying pancakes, hot oil had splattered on her, but she didn't even have time to run her hand under cold water. Helen, carefully arranging sliced vegetables on the last plate, breathed heavily. Just a little more, almost done. The clock on the wall showed 4:30 a.m. Helen, unable to fight the exhaustion, collapsed onto the living room couch. Without even washing her face, she closed her eyes and fell into a deep sleep. But just 2 hours later, her short rest was mercilessly interrupted by her alarm clock. Less than 5 hours remained until 2 p.m., when the guests were expected. Helen forced her heavy body to get up and began wiping the living room table again. Arranging dozens of plates at equal distances, and even placing fresh flowers in a vase, she created a perfect holiday table that any design magazine would envy. Now, all that remained was to get herself ready. Her reflection in the mirror was terrible. Dark circles under her eyes and dull skin eloquently spoke of a sleepless night. Helen quickly took a shower and put on a decent dress she had saved for special occasions. She applied several layers of foundation, desperately trying to hide her haggard appearance. At 1:50 p.m., finally finishing all preparations, Helen came out into the living room and was met by her mother-in-law Patricia's cold gaze. She sat arrogantly on the couch and scrutinized Helen from head to toe. When Helen cautiously said everything was ready, Patricia, with an expression as if looking at an insect, said, "Helen, are you planning to stay here looking like that? Today is not your place." Helen couldn't believe her ears. These were the first words her mother-in-law had spoken to the daughter-in-law who had single-handedly cooked food for dozens of people and cleaned the entire house. "Patricia, what are you saying? I didn't sleep until morning. I prepared all this. When the guests arrive, I should at least greet them." "Greet them? Cooking food is your duty as a daughter-in-law, but appearing before guests is a completely different matter. My son's friends and respected relatives will come, and your plain appearance, like a common diner owner, will only spoil the atmosphere. So, act as if you're not here today." Patricia said this with such naturalness that it hammered nails into Helen's heart. Helen's voice trembled with indignation. "Duty? I worked until I had burns on my hands to preserve your reputation. And now you're telling me to leave? Is that even normal?" "Normal or not, it doesn't matter. Your role ended when you prepared the food. Now you're just getting in the way. So sit in your room or just leave the house. Don't hover around here and don't let the guests see you." Patricia waved her hand, as if shooing away an annoying fly, and went to her room. Helen felt her blood boil. At that moment, her husband, David, came out of the room, and Helen, with a last glimmer of hope, grabbed his sleeve. "Did you hear what your mother said? How can she be like that? Am I a stranger? Am I just hired help in this house?" But David, avoiding her gaze, cowardly turned away. "Helen, Mom didn't mean it badly. Important people are coming today. She also wants to keep up appearances. Can't you just bear it for one day? I'll buy you something nice later." "Appearances? This is my house, bought with my $400,000, and my presence here ruins your reputation. You always ask me to put up with it. But why can't you say a word to your mother? Are you even human?" When Helen poured out her pain, David, on the contrary, became angry. "If I say something, the atmosphere in the house will only get worse. If you sacrifice yourself, everyone will be happy. Why are you complicating things? Act like an adult, please." This cowardly phrase from David severed the last thread of Helen's patience. She snatched her purse with a bitter smirk. There was no longer any reason to stay in this house. As Helen headed for the exit, Patricia came out of her room again and blocked her path. "Where are you going? I told you to leave. Are you really leaving?" "Yes, Patricia, as you wished. I'll disappear. Are you happy now? That's good, but before you leave the house keys. Who knows when you might suddenly burst in and scare the guests. I can't trust you with the keys." Patricia confidently extended her palm. Helen, with a trembling hand, pulled the bunch of keys from her purse. It was humiliating to hand over the keys to her own house, bought with money earned through 10 years of blood and sweat, to the people who were kicking her out. Helen roughly threw the keys onto Patricia's palm. Patricia squeezed them in her fist with a winner's smile. "Now that's better. Go have dinner somewhere and come back late." Helen, without looking back, opened the front door. Behind her, David shouted for her to definitely come back by evening. But to Helen, his voice sounded like noise from hell. As she descended the stairs, Helen's hands trembled with rage. Helen hailed a taxi and went to her parents' home. Her mother, Anne Miller, who opened the door, gasped in horror at her daughter's haggard appearance. Helen, falling into her mother's embrace, burst into the sobs she had held back for so long. Anne, gently stroking her daughter's back, listened to the whole story and, red with anger, exclaimed, "What? They actually took the food you cooked all night, kicked you out, and even took your keys? Helen, enough is enough. That kind of house is not a family. Mom, I can't anymore. I endured all this time to take care of our family, to preserve my family, but they don't consider me a person. just a machine for making money and cooking. Helen, wiping away her tears with a cold gleam in her eyes, turned on her phone. She began searching online for a family lawyer. "Mom, I'm not going back to that house. And if I do, it won't be the same as before. I'm taking back everything. My money, my home, and my dignity. These people, I know better than anyone that they can't even breathe without me." Anne tightly squeezed her determined daughter's hand. "You made the right decision, my dear. Get out of that hell. Mom will help you with everything." Helen, saving the contacts of law firms, made a solemn vow. That brilliant housewarming, from which she was exiled, would be the beginning of the most miserable day of their lives. In Helen's eyes, a cold and firm fire of revenge burned brighter than ever. From the evening of the housewarming day, Helen's phone began to ring incessantly. It was David calling. Helen looked at the screen but didn't answer. 2, 3 times, David kept calling. "I won't answer." Helen flipped her phone face down and sat down to dinner with what her mother had prepared. Anne asked anxiously, "Is that David calling?" "Yes." "I don't want to answer." "Good. The main thing now is to compose yourself." Anne patted her daughter's shoulder. Helen ate a spoonful of rice. At 11 p.m., she checked her phone. 2, 3 missed calls, 18 from David, 5 from Patricia. More than 30 messages. She opened a message from David. "Helen, answer the phone. Where are you? Come home. Let's talk. Please, respond. I'm worried." Helen read it and immediately deleted it. She also checked a message from her mother-in-law. "Helen, come home immediately. Put money in the expense account quickly. If you don't answer, I'll come to your parents' house." Helen smirked. "Put money in the account. Wow." She put her phone aside and closed her eyes. The next morning, turning on her phone, she saw another 35 missed calls, all from David and Patricia. Messages also poured in. "Helen, go grocery shopping. There's nothing to eat at home. The house needs to be cleaned when you get back. Laundry has piled up. Immediately." Helen read message after message, clenching her fists, all in an imperative tone. Not requests, but demands. She also read a message from David. "Helen, Mom is angry. Come quickly and calm her down. Transfer some money for expenses. The account is empty. Helen, please understand, you know Mom's temper." Helen wanted to throw her phone, but she restrained herself and put it aside. Anne knocked on the door. "Darling, breakfast?" "Yes, Mom, I'm coming." Helen went to the living room and sat at the table. Anne asked, "Many calls from your mother-in-law?" "Yes, very many." "What are they writing?" "They're asking for money. They don't have enough to live on." Anne put her spoon down with a clatter. "To live on? You bought them a house with your money, and they're still asking for money to live on. What audacity." "Mom, it's okay. I'm not worried anymore." Helen spoke calmly. Anne looked at her daughter anxiously. At 2 p.m., David called again. Helen switched her phone to silent mode. David's name appeared and disappeared on the screen. Patricia also called. Helen didn't answer. At 7 p.m., she checked her call history. A total of 89 missed calls. 60 from David, 29 from Patricia. 89 times, Helen mumbled quietly. She started to laugh. Another message came from David. "Helen, please answer the phone. Mom is constantly looking for you." Helen replied. Briefly, in one line. "If you need something, write it in a message." David immediately replied. "Transfer money for expenses. Mom can't go to the store. Use the money from my account. We don't know the PIN." "You don't know it because I didn't tell you," Helen replied coldly. David called, but she didn't answer. A message also came from her mother-in-law. "Helen, if you do this, how are we supposed to live?" Helen didn't answer. Patricia sent another message. "Transfer the money immediately, or I'll come to your parents' house." Helen put her phone down. She felt nothing. The next day, David called again. This time, she answered. "Helen, you finally answered. What do you need?" Helen's voice was icy. David was flustered and stammered. We need to transfer money for expenses. Use the money from my account. We don't know the PIN code. Tell me, I'm not going to tell it." "Helen, what does this mean? We're husband and wife." If we were husband and wife, you wouldn't have kicked me out of the housewarming. David fell silent, finding nothing to say. Helen added, "If you need anything, write it in messages. I won't answer calls. Helen, please." Helen hung up and blocked David's number. A message came from Patricia. "Helen, if you act like this, how are we going to live?" Helen replied, "Think about how I lived." Patricia immediately called, but Helen blocked her number too. That's it. The end. Emotions blocked. Helen put her phone down and lay on the bed. Surprisingly, she felt calm. Anne opened the door. "Darling, are you okay?" "Yes, Mom. I'm okay, really." Helen smiled brightly. Anne looked at her daughter with relief. "You did the right thing. Now live your own life." Helen nodded. A week passed since Helen left that hellish house. During that week, life in the house, devoid of Helen, froze like a stopped clock. On the living room table, where Helen usually maintained perfect order, various bills lay scattered. Utility bills for electricity, gas, and internet. Papers with red warnings about overdue payments cut into Patricia's eyes. Patricia impatiently shook the bills and yelled at David, who was locked in his room. "Hey, David, do you even see what this is? All the bills have arrived. What are you going to do about this?" David, looking disheveled, came out of his room and glanced at the scattered receipts on the table. Then, with complete indifference, he casually tossed out a reckless phrase. "Mom, Helen always handled these things. Call her and tell her to pay them. I don't know. Do you think I haven't called? That snake seems to have blocked my number. There aren't even any rings. And she only reads my messages and doesn't reply. You're her husband. You should contact her and sort everything out." David sighed deeply and collapsed onto the couch. "She doesn't answer me either. A few days ago, she blocked my number too. I can't reach her. And I don't have any money. You know my salary was garnished this month. Not a penny in my account." Patricia turned purple with indignation. "Then what? Are we going to starve?" "Fine. Helen bought the apartment, but there should be something for living expenses. Where has it ever been heard of for a daughter-in-law to starve her mother-in-law like this?" Patricia, muttering curses, abruptly opened the refrigerator door. But instead of the expected dishes, the smell of a week-old leftovers from the housewarming hit her nose. The refrigerator, abandoned by Helen, was empty, and the rice bin showed its bottom. Patricia, looking at the empty refrigerator, erupted with curses. That Helen has completely lost her mind, didn't prepare anything, no soup, no main course, and just left. And what are those of us who stayed supposed to do? This is what happens when you're raised without any concept of respect. David, listening to this, couldn't help but interject. "Mom, why should Helen have cooked anything? You cruelly kicked her out on the day of the housewarming. Did you think she would just come back as if nothing happened after that? You even took her keys." Patricia, flustered, instead screamed, "When did I kick her out? I just asked her to leave, so guests wouldn't feel awkward. And I took the keys for safekeeping, because who knows when that snake might burst in and cause a scene. It was all for our family, and you're attacking me." While this pathetic squabble between mother and son continued, David's phone received a call from an unknown number. David, hoping it might be Helen, hastily answered, but from the receiver came a cold and stern male voice. "David Peterson, this is Standard Legal Services calling. We are calling regarding your debt from co-signing for a friend." David's face instantly turned white. Patricia, watching him, held her breath. "Yes, but I'm having difficulties right now. David Peterson, we have already granted you 3 extensions. If you do not pay the $80,000 by Friday of this week, we will be forced to initiate legal proceedings as agreed. A garnishment has already been placed on your salary, but this is insufficient, so we are considering seizing movable assets and placing a lien on the apartment." David, clutching his head, pleaded, "Please, could you give me a little more time? I'll find the money somehow. Until 6 p.m. Friday. If the money is not received, sheriff's deputies will come to your home. Be advised." The call ended, and David collapsed to the floor. Patricia rushed to him. "David, what happened? What was that call?" "Mom, if I don't pay $80,000 by Friday, they're coming to our house to seize property." They say they might even put a lien on the apartment. What should we do? We'll be ruined! Patricia screamed, beating her chest. There was no way to find such a huge sum of money. Then it dawned on her. Get it from Helen. Call her and demand she immediately give you $80,000. You're her husband. Wouldn't a wife help in such a situation? Mom, what makes you think Helen will help? She's already broken with us and left. But you're still husband and wife. Legally, you're still married. How can she ignore her husband's debts? Tomorrow, go to her parents' house. Fall to your knees, plead desperately, but get the money. Otherwise, we'll both end up on the street. Under his mother's pressure, the next day, David, with a heavy heart, went to Helen's parents' house. His hand, pressing the doorbell, trembled slightly. Helen's mother, Anne, opened the door. Seeing David, she blocked his path with an icy expression. Why are you here? It's not enough that you tormented our daughter. Now you show up here too? Anne, please, let me see Helen. I have a very urgent matter. I need to talk to her. Anne, crossing her arms, smirked. Urgent matter? Probably money again. Do you think I don't know you've come to bleed our Helen dry again? After that humiliation at the housewarming, you still have the nerve to come here. What thick skin? No, my mother misunderstood. I couldn't do anything either. Anne, please help me just this once. If I don't return $80,000, I'll be in big trouble. As David bent over, begging profusely, Anne's voice grew even louder. Couldn't do anything. When your wife was being humiliated by your mother and kicked out of her own home, you just stood and watched. Is that how people act? My daughter will no longer live with someone like you. Get out immediately, or I'll call the police and file a report for harassment. Anne roughly pushed David's hand away and slammed the door shut. David stood before the closed door for a long time, then left empty-handed. And so, the fateful Friday morning arrived. David hopefully opened his banking app, but upon seeing the screen, he almost screamed. Due to the forced execution of the court order, even the small remnants in his account had been debited, and the balance showed negative $500. When David told Patricia about this, she screamed and thrashed on the floor. This is all Helen's fault. She betrayed us. She ran away to save her own skin and brought us to this state. Where has it ever been seen to have such a daughter-in-law? Patricia, until the end, did not acknowledge her fault and, sobbing, blamed Helen for everything. At this time, Helen, in her parents' living room, calmly finished her conversation with a lawyer. Dozens of documents lay before her. Yes, Mr. Attorney, please file a motion to seize my husband's movable property and a divorce petition. And please clearly define my rights to the apartment. There's no reason to wait any longer. Helen hung up and, looking at her mother who was watching her, smiled calmly. Mom, now everything begins. That house, that money, and that false sense of respect they cherished so much, everything will return to its rightful place. I will no longer save them. No, I will watch their downfall from the closest distance. Helen's voice was calm but firm, as never before. Now she had no compassion for them, only carefully prepared justice. Helen sat at the table in her room at her parents' house, sorting through traces of past years. Documents lay on the table, testifying to the blood and sweat she had shed for that house. Purchase agreements, transfer statements, bank records, all of it clearly showed how $400,000, down to the last penny, had left Helen's account. The evidence is perfect. There's no longer any reason to doubt. Helen, placing the documents in a folder, quietly mumbled. At that moment, her mother, Anne, entered the room with a cup of hot tea. Darling, are you ready for your meeting with the lawyer? Didn't forget anything? Yes, Mom. All the bank statements, the contract, I have everything. I'll go now and put an end to it. Anne sympathetically hugged her daughter's shoulders tightly. Helen nodded with a determined look, picked up her bag, and left the house. At the law firm, the attorney began to meticulously examine the documents Helen had brought. As he reviewed them, his gaze became increasingly confident. Helen Miller, your evidentiary basis is simply impeccable. The entire amount for the apartment was paid by a check issued in your name. The check number will confirm this. You are listed as the sole owner in the contract. There are no doubts here. Yes, these are all my savings, which I accumulated over 10 years working at the diner. And what was your husband's financial contribution? None. On the contrary, due to his co-signed debts, his salary was garnished. He lived on my money, and I even paid the interest on his debts. The lawyer, putting the documents in a folder, said firmly, "In the matter of asset division, you have an overwhelming advantage. We'll immediately begin the divorce proceedings. Chances of winning are 100%. Yes, Mr. Attorney, I'm counting on you," Helen calmly replied. The lawyer cautiously asked, "Are you planning to inform your husband's family about the lawsuit in advance?" "No, there's no need. I don't want to explain anything now. They'll get a summons from the court. Then they'll find out." Leaving the office, Helen and her mother went to a nearby cafe. Anne, sipping her coffee, cautiously began the conversation. "Darling, maybe you should still tell your mother-in-law everything that's built up. Tell her about all the humiliations at that housewarming. So, you feel lighter?" "Mom, there's no need. My explanations won't change them, and I'm not planning some grand revenge. The fact that I will no longer be their cash cow is the biggest revenge." Helen looked out the window and spoke calmly. Anne was proud of her daughter, but at the same time felt pain for her, and she squeezed her hand tightly. A month later, when David, unsuspecting, was still waiting for Helen's return, a court notification arrived on his phone. It was a summons for a divorce petition. Reading it, David, with a pale face, ran to Patricia. "Mom, trouble. Helen filed for divorce." Patricia snatched the document from his hands and began to read. Her hands, holding the paper, trembled. What kind of antics are these? This shameless woman has completely lost her mind. She decided to get divorced. "Mom, what should we do? It seems she really wants to end everything. What to do? What to do?" Immediately run to her parents' house and force her to withdraw the lawsuit. Fall to your knees, cling to her, but bring her back. At his mother's insistence, David began staking out Helen's parents' house the next day, but he didn't even see her shadow. Instead, Anne, who came out, furiously chased him away. "Anne, please, let me see Helen. I'm to blame for everything. There's no reason to meet. Leave immediately. If you appear here again, I'll report you to the police for harassment. If you have anything to say it through your lawyer in court." Anne decisively slammed the door, and David, pacing for a moment, left empty-handed. Patricia, in despair, began calling relatives, complaining about Helen and asking for help. "Hello? Can you believe it? Our daughter-in-law left home and filed for divorce. Where has it ever been heard of?" But the reaction was not at all what she expected. "Patricia, rumors have reached me too. They say at the housewarming, you locked your daughter-in-law in the kitchen, made her work alone, then kicked her out of the house, and they say she bought the apartment herself. Isn't that a bit much?" Patricia, flustered, raised her voice. "That's not true. She didn't want to come out because she was busy. And our son got the money for the apartment. All the relatives know your son's salary is garnished because of his co-signing. Patricia, stop being stubborn. Apologize to your daughter-in-law." Patricia slammed the phone down. Other relatives, one by one, also sided with Helen, condemning Patricia. The reputation she had so carefully built collapsed overnight. Meanwhile, Patricia and David's lives turned into a nightmare. A yellow warning notice for unpaid utility bills hung on the front door, and electricity and gas were on the verge of being cut off. David's salary was not coming in due to garnishment, and Patricia, opening the empty refrigerator, cried every night. Finally, the day of the court hearing arrived. Helen and her lawyer confidently entered the courtroom, while an exhausted David sat limply next to his lawyer. When the session began, Helen's lawyer presented the prepared evidence. These documents confirm that all $400,000 for the apartment were the funds of the plaintiff, Helen Miller. The defendant, David Peterson, not only had no financial contribution but also caused significant material damage to the plaintiff. David's lawyer tried to object, claiming it was marital property, but the judge, seeing the clear transfer statements and documents regarding David's debts presented by Helen, shook his head. The court orders the dissolution of the marriage between the plaintiff Helen Miller and the defendant David Peterson. Furthermore, ownership of the aforementioned apartment, as well as all other assets, is recognized as belonging to the plaintiff. Helen calmly bowed, and David, with the face of a man who had lost everything, collapsed onto the bench. As Helen left the courtroom, Anne hugged her tightly. "You've suffered enough, darling. Now you are truly free from that hell." "Yes, Mom. Now everything is truly over." Patricia, learning of the court's decision over the phone, dropped it to the floor. "They took the house, and there's no money. Where do we go now?" "David, we're ruined." Patricia, collapsing onto the cold living room floor, burst into sobs, but there was no one to listen to her crying. At this time, Helen sat by the window in her parents' living room and enjoyed the warm rays of the sun. When Anne approached and asked if she felt lighter, Helen smiled brightly and replied, "Mom, it's not so much sweet revenge as feeling like I've finally finished a very long and difficult homework assignment. I have nothing left to give and nothing left to lose, so my heart feels so peaceful." It turns out that those who leave silently ultimately win. Helen pulled out a notebook from her purse with sketches of ideas for a new diner. Helen's eyes, having decided to live only for herself and not be someone's insurance, shone brighter than ever. When writing this story, the most poignant moment for me was the fact that the home Helen created, investing everything she had, became a prison for her, isolating and destroying her. Exploitation under the guise of family can sometimes be more cruel than from strangers, especially the mother-in-law's words, "You are our family's insurance," which implied that the daughter-in-law was not seen as a person but as an asset to be used, foreshadowed a great tragedy. Ultimately, the lesson this story gives us is that patient kindness does not always guarantee happiness. When someone begins to take your value for granted, and even excludes you, the most powerful revenge is not an outburst of anger, but a quiet reclamation of all your resources. As Helen demonstrated, ceasing emotional investment and clearly establishing legal and financial boundaries is the wisest way to protect yourself. The one who leaves silently ultimately wins. Through this story, I wanted to convey the idea that instead of being insurance for others, one must become the most reliable fortress for oneself. I sincerely wish Helen, who has finally found true peace, good luck in her new endeavor.